am super excited to be talking to Alix Aharon today. Alix, you have been doing some really important investigative journalism about what's happening in Israel as well as around the world. So my biggest question is, how did you get involved in this?
Sure. So I suppose my curiosity started around 5 years ago. I'm originally from Scotland, so I was kind of born, normalized into this type of language. Okay, by the time that I was, by the time that I'd already emigrated to Israel, people were very using different types of language. The whole "born in the wrong body" had kind of started that idea. And interestingly, I was watching a documentary on Israeli TV about four teenagers who were going to be joining the IDF as boys.
Oh,
Now, right, so this really upset me for many reasons. I could clearly see that these girls were just lesbians and had gone through some sort of dreadful medicalized process. And I then also began to think about the ethics of telling a girl that she can identify her way to the point of being in a male infantry brigade. You know what I mean? That's pretty far. And then I kind of started talking a little bit with some male friends, and I said, how would you feel if you were forced to shower with a woman, sleep in the same tank, essentially, maybe as a woman?
right.
How would you feel? And they were horrified as well. And then I started thinking, wait, what is this crazy diagnosis that we're giving to people? And I started to write about it. I started to write, I started to complain about this documentary, and all of a sudden I got floods of emails from people that I grew up with in Scotland telling me that their children were trans identifying and saying to me, what's going on. So this is how I got into the investigation, which initially led me all the way to the US and to Planned Parenthood, which is I think probably at the apex of criminals.
Yes, and it's just increasingly devastating. I just saw a post from a girl who was friends with my son in high school, who has two little girls, two twin daughters, who has decided she's no longer a woman. And I just think, what have we come to as a society where mothers are going to be telling their little girls that they're no longer women, and that they can go to Planned Parenthood without any medical diagnosis or therapy and get on dangerous hormones?
Well, I also think it plays into something that's just so well known within you and within me. I don't know what a real woman is. I don't think I am a real woman. I really don't. I don't know what that means. And
To
I
feel
also,
like a woman. I mean, especially when I think about I don't know if you grew up in Scotland, there was like an ad when I was a little girl for a perfume called Ajali. And so you
Mhm.
can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan. And it was this whole myth of like the superwoman. And I never
Right.
felt like that ever.
Course not. And also it's just not a healthy concept either. This is, I'm a real person, because I really didn't feel like a real woman for a long time. And I had a very aggressive eating disorder for several years, nearly, over a decade, which led me to all kinds of problems really in life. And so for me, this gender thing is very personal in that way. I see myself in all of these girls that are saying, I don't want to be a woman, I don't want to be a woman, because I didn't want to. And
And
I
that
didn't want.
eating disorder component is so interesting, because I had what they term gender dysphoria, and I also had eating disorders. And a lot of it was because the eating disorder was me trying to keep myself looking like a boy. Um, you know, Thin and not curvy the way grown women are generally
Right.
looking. And so I see these dovetailing, these various diagnoses, and that self-hatred of the body and that trying to control the body.
Yeah, I see it completely as well. I mean, I remember when I was 10, 11, going to sleep and praying that I would wake up without breasts, This is like the dream, like I would take them away, I would make them gone. And if that had been me, would I have thought that I had gender dysphoria, or am I really a boy? Probably not. But I would have been sneaky and manipulative enough to probably tell people that I was, so that I could get on testosterone. You know what
And
I
have your
mean?
breasts medically removed. I mean, surgically removed.
Heck yeah. That's a,
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, it's really sick and disgusting to think back, but that there was a time really where I was aspiring to that. And I wasn't like, lock her up. That I wasn't, a crazy person going out robbing banks. I was the woman that was at home and that was looking at things on the internet and was believing this horrible stuff about myself. And so when I see these girls being interviewed about how they're now boys, I just think, shame on all of you that are interviewing her, and shame on you, all the people that are performing surgery, because you really need to be exposed, because I see it for what it is.
And
And I know,
reinforcing the self-hatred that these girls have, and the idea that they're inherently flawed, and the only way that they can become their authentic selves is to self-harm.
yeah, it's so disturbing. And then when we take it a step further, when we take it a step back, and we go and we stop looking at the girls, right? Forget the teenage girls, because that's one thing. Let's look at the children. These children, a boy that's 3 years old that wants to be in a dress is probably going to grow up to be a healthy gay adult, and we're
And
talking
maybe
about,
just an adult. I mean,
I mean, an
I
adult.
mean,
but,
it's
but
not uncommon at all for little boys to want to wear dresses, especially if they have sisters or mothers that they adore. I mean,
so crazy. And I don't know why, we'll go into it later on when we talk about the puberty blockers, because it's the very, I really have to question the sanity of any parent. Not that I'm trying not to judge the parents, because I find I'm so quick to go to that place of judgment, because I see it so clearly as abuse, right? But when I get into the mindset of, okay, they really think they are born in the wrong body, but I have to question their sanity here. I really do. And also their motives for going to the doctor for a 6-year-old child.
and that's
It's,
where I try, like you, very hard not to be judgmental, but I'm seeing some very concerning patterns. One of the things that I see is women who are, they look to me like women who are buying into the very stereotypical idea of what it is to be a woman, and they
yeah,
have daughters who aren't fitting into that, and so they're
yeah,
pushing those daughters to decide that they're boys instead, because they're ashamed of
yeah,
having an ugly or chubby or gender nonconforming daughter. And the same thing with effeminate boys, that
yeah,
parents are saying an effeminate little boy, and they're very uncomfortable with it, and rather than thinking maybe my son is gay, or maybe I
yeah.
just have an effeminate boy, they're saying, oh, they're actually a girl. And so I feel like there's a lot of parents who are pushing this onto their kids, and they may not be malicious about it, but they
Mm.
need to be challenged because their thought process is really distorted.
Definitely. And when I think, when I look back, when I first saw the Susie Green TED Talk, Susie Green, the CEO of Mermaids, I picked up on something she said so quickly, and I was just thought, how are people buying into this? She said, I thought my child was going to grow up to be one of the village people. Right. So she I know the village people were not effeminate little boys. They were masculine gay men in uniform. She's not saying I'm scared that my boy is a girl. She's saying I'm scared my little boy is gay. She's deeply homophobic. And the whole gender ideology is deeply homophobic. But she specifically, in saying that, I have to really think: is everybody on the room just drinking the Kool-Aid that they don't see that?
Or are we so accepting of homophobia now that we're
Mm-hmm.
willing to cause our children to be medically damaged and to be psychologically abused
Yeah.
because we're so afraid that they might be gay? I mean, that's a horrific thought. But if she said that, I mean, that's the only conclusion, because they're not, I mean, the village people were macho men. I mean,
Exactly. It's so strange that she would use that. And it wasn't just me that picked up on this, actually. It was someone else. They mentioned it first, and I picked up. I was like, you know, that's crazy that she would even make that type of reference, because she's now exposed herself entirely as to what this is, you know. Even if you are to buy into all of the rubbish that, you know, oh, she's doing the right by her child, oh, she's da da da, no, she's afraid she has a gay child, and you need to challenge everyone that is coming around and saying that to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I saw a documentary and these parents were talking about how their boy was really a girl, trapped in the wrong body. And they
Mhm.
interviewed the father and he said something like, she even runs like a girl. And I was like, whoa, this is a little boy who maybe isn't physically as mature as his peers, or maybe is not coordinated. And for
Mhm.
him to make that statement, she even runs like a girl, about
Mhm.
his little boy, I was just like, we are messed up. And the fact that we have doctors who are reinforcing it. And that's where I feel really concerned about parents of, you know, kids who come in and say that they're born in the wrong body,
Yeah.
instead of the parents pushing it. When the kids come to them and say, you know, especially as, you know, tweens and teens, and then the
Mhm.
parents get this information, well, if you don't affirm them, they're going to kill themselves, from doctors and therapists and teachers and the media.
Yeah.
So I do have a lot of compassion for parents in that position.
I also have compassion for parents whose kids picked this up in school. You know, they picked it up from the sex education lessons, which, you know, I can definitely go into a lot more here. The sex education lessons, frankly, are scandalous. They are teaching concepts like cis privilege. Okay, so, you know, just that very idea is so preposterous. A young girl does not have any privilege over males. It's so stupid. Really, are we really saying this? And they get the more these I think of them as activists, right? The more these activist teachers or whoever it is that's pushing this, the more things they start saying, the crazier and crazier they become. So they said, very funnily, I hijacked their webinars, you know, to see what kind of nonsense they're speaking. And they said that currently the US only allows male and female on birth certificates, but it's a great injustice, and don't worry, it'll be changed soon. And I'm thinking, you know, Planned Parenthood is providing health, right? Healthcare to female people, mainly female people. And I'd be very worried if my doctor at Planned Parenthood told me that they'd recently discovered a third sex, you know.
Or a non-sex, that I mean, the whole baby phenomenon, where
The whole,
people are raising their
yeah.
kids without saying that they have any sex, is just, it's shocking. It's just,
Well, it's so transparent as well. It really is. It's so completely transparent. And the girls that say that they are non-binary, okay, maybe I'm non-binary. I quite like that idea. Throw off the shackles, but they
yes.
still need to get surgery. They
Right, and
still,
that's the thing that just crazy is, I see all these men who say that they've come out as non-binary, but then they get on estrogen, and these girls who come out as non-binary, but they get their breasts chopped off and they go on testosterone. So it's like, well, if we're not going to conform to gender roles, fine, but
yeah.
why the self-harm component?
I really think it's got a lot to do with money, because nobody's these ideas were quite literally created in a vacuum. These ideas are they are so crazy and they're so widely accepted, but they're only believed and perpetuated, I think, by a very small amount of influential people. And we're kind of gaslit multiple times into believing this, you know, non-binary people are valid, non-binary people are valid. It's like,
It's
it's
just this
very
mantra
false.
of trans
Mantra.
women are women, trans women
Yeah,
are women. I mean,
right.
it's just, and and the media is perpetuating it at an
Mhm.
amazing, I mean, we have you know, bills where we're trying to prevent biological males from competing against biological females in women's
Yeah,
sports, and the media will say transphobic bill tries to prevent transgender people
yeah,
from competing, which is just a lie.
right.
That's not what the bill is at all.
Well, I also got completely attacked when I started to challenge some of these conversion bills, because I was saying, okay, listen, we need to really understand from the language of this. Are we talking about electroshocking gay people, or are we talking about a 14-year-old girl who's confused and needs some help? Because they pushed that 3 or 4 months ago in Israel. And then obviously they kind of gave up because COVID and everything happened. But when they take it back up, I'm going to be continuing to be pushing this. That's part of my kind of the stuff that I'm doing on the ground. Is I send out a lot of leaflets, I send, transing children is abuse. I send this to the surgeons. I post their information to let everybody know what's happening about it, which has actually turned into a global project, which,
Yes, and we're going to talk about soon. I'm excited that you're sharing it.
It started out really just me maliciously and angrily feeling helpless, so posting the details of the gender doctors here locally and sending them messages and informing people they're abusing children. Do you know about puberty blockers, etc., etc.? And now there's over 900 locations, which is either it's great because we're naming and shaming them, or it's awful because there's so many that we just can't possibly track.
Well, and in the US, a lot of them are university, publicly funded institutions that are doing this. And it's just, it's shocking. And you mentioned the conversion therapy, and that's one way that they've really hijacked the language, because most people would say, of course, we don't want conversion therapy. We don't want gays electrocuted. But in the States, as in Israel, they are slipping in this whole gender ideology. And so children like me would not be able to get the appropriate help that they need for their gender identity issues. And instead they are affirmed. And affirmation, as we know, starts with the social transition, but then quickly leads to the medical transitioning.
Yeah, of course. And the very idea that it's there's this new word of transphobia, which I don't accept, because there's no limit on that word.
Right.
There's no upper limit. So transphobia can be applied to someone like me that has some serious concerns about what we're doing to children, and it can also be applied to someone who goes out with a knife and stabs people. It's such a, we need to bring the terms back.
Or to a lesbian who won't sleep with a male-bodied person.
Yeah, of course. That's very, I mean, that's clear transphobia.
Well, heaven forbid we have genital preferences.
I can't even stand the term genital preferences, and the amount of the number of women that talk about this in private is astounding, and they won't talk about it publicly, and they just won't. And I get quite direct with people about it, especially I have many friends who I say to them, you don't believe what you're saying. You don't really believe. You would never, I mean, and they don't want to go for it. But they need to. Every woman has to do it, because you need to think about the 14-year-old girl who would die, who lives inside of you, because that's who we need to protect now.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful for what you're doing. Do you want to start your slideshow?
Yeah, so I'd love to. So we go into kind of the history of the. So let's start out at the horrible truth about GnRH, which is the official term for puberty blockers, which leads us nicely into Planned Parenthood and the business of gender identity, and shockingly how this fits in with tech companies, reputable tech companies. So in 1969, the first gender identity clinic was opened. It was a secret one that was opened at Johns Hopkins. And very soon after, there was a paper written in 1971 about the psychological harms that children would face if they were to go through an early puberty. They described an early puberty for a girl as being 8 and a boy as being 9. So this was very much on they talked a lot of nonsense about how they weren't going through the same stages as their peers, how very dangerous this was, etc., etc. But there's no physical implications for an 8-year-old to go through puberty. And I think that really has to be emphasized when we're thinking about why on earth did we ever create these medications, because there's absolutely no benefits to them whatsoever from a physical standpoint. Okay. And, you know, to this day, there is no FDA approval for these, and they're used off label. There's no reason to be giving these to any child. So
I always sort of think of it as you're inducing developmental delays. And in
yeah.
what world do we want to induce a developmental delay on a child?
In no worlds,
Yeah.
well, in the gender identity world, I think that you have to plug in and go into the gender identity world and fully immerse yourself, and then all of this all of this will start to make a lot more sense, because it's so highly ideological. And I think it often very much turns into theology. When you're talking to activists about this, it's a religious belief that you can be born in the wrong body. It's no less crazy than Jesus died for our sins or whatever. I'm not don't want to make fun of anyone who believes that, you know, Jesus died for your sins. I'm just saying it's no less out there, right?
No less a religious belief, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is that we sort of have categories
Yeah.
for, you know, what is fully accepted as something that's empirically true versus
Yeah.
something that's a belief system. And when you start getting into something that's a belief system, then you have to be careful about trying to insist that it's scientific truth.
Exactly. I mean, I would really, I've read lots of so-called religious texts. You know, I've read the Book of Dianetics, I've read the Book of Mormon, and I would really argue, you know, these are theologies, and gender identity is no less of a theology than this one. And in fact, it fits in quite nicely, to be honest. It really
Right.
does.
And
So
yet, there aren't instances where we start to legislate theologies the way we're
right.
legislating the trans ideology.
Yeah, it's kind of it's sort of it's quite worrying, actually, that we've managed to go this far, and also that it's so deeply irrational. It really is. And it's almost like saying, okay, let's put into legislation that you know, the world was created in 6 days, and it's hate speech if you think that it wasn't.
Right.
And you must sign your name into a pledge to say that you believe this so-called truth.
Otherwise, you're a hateful person.
Hateful person, and you will lose your job, and you will lose you will lose everything, essentially. And
you know, the other thing that strikes me as even a more important differentiation between most theologies and the transgender ideology is that most religious beliefs are grounded in the concept of helping people to be more healthy and successful.
Yeah.
That's, you know, sort of their underlying current, whether or not you agree with that, but that's sort of what they're getting at. Whereas the transgender ideology is specifically about self-harming and causing disease and causing lifelong dependence on drugs.
Absolutely. And there's also, I would say that trans ideology really does differentiate from any religion, because I can call up a person who's really deeply into Islam, and I can say, come and let's have a discussion about why Muhammad's not the prophet. And they will come and they will have a talk with me. The same thing with a Mormon. They'll go out into the street and try and convince you that Joseph Smith is a prophet. They really believe, and they'll have, I mean, they're not combative, but they'll have discussions.
And they'll be respectful, though. I mean, and
100%.
they try to like bring you in rather than saying, you are hateful, we want to kill you.
It's reverse conversion to the religion. And because I often reach out my hand to people who write hateful things to me, and I say, listen, instead of this, can I just tell you my concerns about teenage girls, and maybe you don't know everything about puberty blockers, and they just block me immediately. So, you know, there's no
there's no room for discussion.
No room for discussion whatsoever. So if we go back to the 1980s, right, which was kind of when the DSM started to get involved in this. So the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which everybody always refers to, you know, for being the reason behind gender dysphoria. But it was first entered in 1980, which was really significant, because what it did was it gave Medicaid and Medicare and all of the insurance companies reason to start to pay for some of these, you know, surgeries and some of these things. And now this is where we start to get deeper and deeper into conspiracy territory. So this is why I think it's really important to put this out in a visual. And all of this is closed. This issue is closed. This is a closed case that the manufacturers of Lupron, Abbott and Tadeka. So what they were doing is they were paying cash settlements to doctors that would prescribe Lupron in 2001. Now they gave some really crazy things. They gave ski chalets. They didn't give any cash, but they would give people grants. Okay, grant for this, grant for that. And that case was settled for. It settled for almost $900 million, and it settled in fraud. So it really proves that the drug companies were pushing the doctors to selling and prescribing and pushing, just like drug dealers, pushing these puberty blockers. And today it's part of one of the largest biotech. They're puberty blockers in themselves are an institution. They really are. So when you're challenging someone's use of puberty blockers, you need to know you're not just challenging an ideology, you're challenging a whole financial system that's backing it up.
Well, and in the US, some of these pharmaceutical companies are even now paying for people to go into the schools and actively recruit children into this thought process. And so
Exactly.
it's incredibly insidious.
They're feeding the mouth that feeds them. They're feeding themselves, and that Planned Parenthood is actually feeding themselves, because they're solving the gender identity crisis in girls, and they're creating the gender identity crisis in girls. Right. And it's amazing and shocking that we've actually got this far. And there is a Planned Parenthood is like, it's a very good organization in that it's hiding behind a very good name of doing some very good work for women, years ago. And I think that they're using and they're trading on that name to do all of the various things that they're doing. And they never would have gotten as far as they have if they were called, gendered science or something, something that wasn't quite
Eugenics Organization of the World.
That's a great one. I think we should replace it, because this is eugenics, I think. And I think that the more, the slide that we're looking at now is that Boston's Children's Hospital was the first one that began transitioning children at the age of 3. And from the time of 2007 until now, we've entered into a new world, right? We're now in the Matrix. We're in La La Land, because from that very first patient, we're now into a whole new kind of land and sphere. And I hate to put this slide on you, Erin, because
that's a woman.
I hate the word triggered, but this triggers me.
It does me too. I'm just so offended. Like, here I am coming out as a woman in a little tiny corset and big old boobs.
I have one of those, but I say that. No, but so anyway, the reason I use this is because I actually think that Caitlyn groomed a lot of us. Caitlyn groomed a lot of the women that are.
Can we just say Bruce, please? Can we just say Bruce?
No, because I think it's important that we use the word Caitlyn, because Caitlyn is the one that had the show on E, and this is something that was pushed on all of us, and we were trying to do mental gymnastics to try and accept it, and worrying, because Caitlyn cannot exist if the children don't exist, right? You get what I mean? Yeah. Because all of these AGPs, all of these autogynephiles, they always tell you, I was always a woman. When I was 3 years old, I was a woman. When I was getting my wives pregnant, I was a woman. When I was winning the gold medal, I was a woman. And it's so, without that assertion, the assertion that there are such a thing as trans children, they have to exist with each other, right? And that's, I think, what was really important about the important part that Bruce played, because between 2010 to 2014, this is when we saw the massive increase of these gender identity clinics just
Right.
popping up. And people, I think, at the time, I mean, I know myself, certainly, kind of in 2013, 2014, I sort of thought that this was something that primarily hypergender dysphoric gay men would do. And I sort of thought this is a new, just a new part of the, I didn't know that this was a variant sexuality, essentially, that AGP is just a sexuality. And later on, when I read Reed Blanchard, I found out, the whole kind of typology. But it's at the time I sort of just threw it to the back of my mind and thought, there's no way they're doing this to kids. There's no way.
Well,
But
the other thing that it strikes me is that this is really when, at least for me, the narrative of this isn't a transsexual, that,
Mm-hmm.
that Bruce is a woman. That's when this
Right.
started to get into our kind of our language and our ideas, that, and anybody who who questioned that started to become hateful, because poor old Caitlyn had suffered so much that how could we doubt that he's actually a woman. That was the whole
Well,
narrative. So it was a really important moment.
It was so important. And because I also speak, because now, one of the things that I'm really focusing on doing right now is my map, is my kind of my map. And of course my writing and everything that I do goes into it, but the map of the gender offenders, in order to create the testimonials, I need to speak to the detransitioners and I need to speak to the moms and dads. So 2014 is a very important year in most of these F to M's and M to F's life. And I want to mention this as being what I think as one of the most mainstreaming of this very fringe issue. It was a very fringe issue, at the time. Even when I Am Kate came out, I mean, it was so funny. It was just, I felt guilty for laughing, I felt like this was, and I thought everybody else felt the same. And then I see Bruce on Ellen being interviewed, and Bruce is going, I don't know, Ellen. I don't know about gay marriage. I mean, and I'm like, so you have this iconic lesbian, who, Ellen, who's being told that Bruce Jenner is kind enough to accept her, it's so awful. And I thought that it's just, and
Ellen went along with it. Ellen has enabled this. Somehow Ellen has accepted Bruce Jenner as a fellow lesbian.
She knows, Ellen knows she can't. She just, oh, come on. It's so ridiculous. It's just too much. And I think that, when I speak to people who were like, leaders in the lesbian community in the US, and they say to me, I really want to talk to Rachel Maddow. I really want to talk to Ellen, and, women to women, find out what the heck they're saying. Because I know they're lying and they're lying, because you and I both know what a woman is, and that's it's not it.
No.
Yeah. So this takes us on to kind of the 2014 to 2016 sort of period of this fiasco. So obviously on the left, we're seeing Jazz Jennings is also an incredibly important figure in the concept of gender affirming surgeries, because during these two times the surgeries went way up, increased fourfold. That's not globally, that's just in the US. And at the very beginning I mentioned that one of the things that really got me quite upset was the story of those 4 girls in Israel. One of them was being interviewed, and they referenced going to the US, seeing an episode of I Am Jazz, and then coming back and then having this realization. And no one picked up on how completely ridiculous that was and how much that needed to be investigated. Because, I mean, I was so upset at Jazz Jennings' series. I thought, this is irresponsible. This is, quite frankly, abuse.
I mean, I can't imagine any other show where we would systematically watch people abusing a child year after year, and feel like it was okay. And yet that's what was happening with I Am Jazz.
And it's also the fact of whether or not his mother had, you know, Munchausen by proxy, right? We can just, you know, that's maybe just speculation. But the facts are the facts, is that this kid just for whatever reason didn't feel like a boy, didn't feel good enough to be a boy, and then was put on this mental path, this completely irrational, crazy, unloving path, and is now you know, a celebrity of sorts. And it's just, Jazz can never go back. Not that they could not just from the surgeries, they can never go back and just enjoy, you know, falling in love with a man, you know, just falling in love with themselves. They've had all of that completely robbed, completely taken away from them. And the irony that these kids grow into adults that can never experience sexual pleasure, never, you know, never mind fertility. It's just, it's just so shocking. And then on the right side of the slide, you see this is actually the true story, just a snippet of my map of shame that I have. That there is a doctor that offered Lupron to a child that thought they might be a lesbian. Now we really need to let that sink in and just think how
Whoa.
completely awful that is.
Whoa.
Yeah, the child went in, said that they were having, you know, some young child, said that they were just experiencing some feelings, thought they might have a crush on another girl, and the doctor wanted to put them on Lupron. Just how awful that is, and how much we need to protect these girls. We need to save them. We really do. And you know, so, sometimes I feel that I have all of these names and addresses. Sometimes I want to go out there with signs and protest, you know?
Yeah,
And
I feel like we need to figure out a way to make this more visible because the media is not covering it. And these
Mhm.
children are being permanently damaged. I mean, and our society is being damaged. The whole narrative of what it means to be a boy and a girl is just being completely convoluted to the point where I don't know very many girls who really would want to be a girl based on how the autogonophiles are now defining womanhood.
Right, exactly. And also, I think the romanticization of what it is to be a boy. A lot of these detransition girls that I speak to, they have this kind of very childlike, not childlike, teenage obsession with gay male culture. So you know, they wanted to, you know, they saw themselves in the movies and on the YouTube channels, and they were like, oh, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the gang. And they thought, okay, the only way I can be part of the gang is if I'm another gay man. And the irony is that when you speak to when you speak to gay men, you know they do not like it when these women are on their dating apps. In fact, they feel, I would say they feel just as I feel they feel more angered, I think, than the women. But they really don't like it, and they will get rejected. And someone, one of the detransitioners, spoke to me, and they said, I wish I would have been spoken to by an older gay male who could have explained to me how much I'd be rejected and just how much
Aw.
every men don't want this. But thankfully, she didn't have any surgeries. But she, you know, she had 4 years of living as a gay male. I mean, it's just so we're getting really ridiculous at this point. We really are. And this now takes me on to the. I think that they're the biggest criminals. I mean, sorry, I've yet to be convinced that they're not the biggest criminals. Okay, so this is probably one of the kind of the Alex Jones moment, right? Of the kind of the gender story is that the CEO of Tumblr joined the board of Planned Parenthood in 2004. 2014, I'm sorry. His name is David Karf, okay?
Wow.
Massively successful guy, incredibly amazing, invents Tumblr. As you know, and as I know, I've spoken to so many detransitioners, all of them mentioned Tumblr as being one of the main factors in them having this crazy idea that they're born in the wrong body. So he knows what's going on. He really knows what's going on. He then joins Planned Parenthood, and 2 years later, they start to offer hormones. Okay. And I have to challenge, what the hell does LGBT services mean? Because gays and lesbians do not need special surgeries, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as, you know, I think what is this nonsense? What are we saying here? Because when I see that on a wall, or when I see that, LGBT services, I don't know what that means. I really don't know, because children surely do not need these services ever. And teenage girls surely do not need these services ever. So why are we calling them that? Because I think that you could never write transsexual services on the wall.
Right. And the thing that's scary now is that they have convinced a lot of people that these are medically necessary surgeries. So now they're being funded by public programs because they're considered medically necessary. And the other thing, you have it down here that you can get the hormones without any therapy, without any referral, without any kind of evaluation. I talked to a woman whose daughter went to Planned Parenthood and got testosterone, and she was so concerned about it, she decided to see how easy it was. And she found out it was incredibly easy. She walked in, she had a baseball cap over her long hair, and she said that she had always thought like that she was born in the wrong body, and they gave her a prescription for testosterone without any kind of evaluation whatsoever.
Yeah, and the Planned Parenthood model is quite shocking, because they also go they don't tell the truth on their form, and also they don't they really need to take a blood test to give testosterone because of the effect that it has on the heart. They also need to be weighing these patients as well. They don't weigh them. There's no blood test taken. It's just a blood prick of the finger that's taken. And also they don't take a medical history. Right. You need to know if somebody has four grandparents that all died at the age of 40. That needs to be in the medical records, and you need to really think about.
Or if they've had a significant history of mental illness, because that might be a red flag.
I mean, a history of mental illness, it really doesn't matter, because one of the detransitioners I spoke to went in while they were essentially having like a postnatal depression. They were postnatal psychosis, I think is more accurate. And they went in, kind of thought, testosterone will fix what I want, and it did fix what they wanted for a while. It fixed them for a bit, because they got a little bit more energy. They had more appetite. They had some more pep, some more kind of get up and go. And then all of a sudden they realized, whoa, this is, I was going through a mental crisis. And the reason that Planned Parenthood did not, that I think has taken this and has made it kind of, they're trying to switch their narrative now. If you go onto their YouTube channel, they used to have some very informative videos about, safe sex, about how to protect yourself, even just about practical things, about day-to-day life relationships. Now it's all about non-binary healthcare. I heard this one today. This woman said, this woman who's, just with a short haircut, said, I didn't feel comfortable with heteronormative healthcare. I'm thinking they're entering new words into the lexicon every day.
It is so ironic, because the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was a eugenicist. And so it's almost like they've come full circle now, and now back to their roots. And one of the things that I wanted to raise a concern about is that for the hormones, they will give them out to anybody over 18, as far as I know, without any kind of evaluation. For children to get puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones from Planned Parenthood, they're supposed to have a parent or a guardian come in. But my experience with Planned Parenthood leads me to believe that they probably could bring pretty much any adult in with them who claim to be their guardian or parent, and that would be enough. And I don't have any evidence of that other than my experience with them and things that I've heard. But it's something to be very concerned about, because we know that one of the things the trans activists do is they distance kids from their biological families or their families of origin, and they say, I'll be your mother, I'll be your father, I'll be your family. And they take over that role and separate kids from their families of origin.
Well, that's exactly what the Rachel McKinnon does. They say, if your family, questions your new trans identity, I'll be your glitter family. Yeah. And that's actually what a cult does. So when you join a cult, they will rename you. you know, you'll no longer be, you know, James, you will now be Cynthia, whatever. They will rename you. That's what a cult does.
Right.
They do that. And they will then tell you that we are your new family. Heck, the Manson family, you know. I mean, this is old news. And the narratives and the ideas that they are pushing, they are so far from the word progressive.
Yeah.
They are old. They're old. They're almost a century old. This idea, you know, these ideas that people are born in the wrong body. It's just so crazy. And you know, I have a personal bone with the CEO of Tumblr, because I really feel that he knows about the massive problem with the ROGD girls, the suicidal ideation that you have also on Tumblr, the amount of self-harm that's on Tumblr. And very interesting, a detransitioner told me about a week ago that, you know, Billie Eilish?
I'm not familiar with Billie Eilish.
So Billie Eilish is like a quirky singer, you know, whatever. I thought like she just looks like a harmless girl. I'm sure she is a harmless girl, but she has, you know, this kind of theme that goes through everything of like, you know, cuts on my arm, bruises on my arm. It's very idealizing being hurt or hurting. And I, you know, because and that sort of, I really think that, you know, why on earth would Tumblr want to get into bed with Planned Parenthood, and why would they want, why the other way around? Because I don't think that they belong together. I think that you need to have your healthcare provider over here and your blog over here. I mean, why would they ever meet unless there really is something very, very sinister going on? And I have to, you know,
And you see pictures like this. This is this poor girl who has gone through so much, and I've seen interviews with her and how easy it was to get cross-sex hormones and
yeah. Well, she's a hero. She really is a hero because her
this is Thomason, right?
Yeah, she's really allowed, I think, her picture being in that gallery and being part of this exhibit, and also going onto the BBC and talking about what happened to her. That can't be easy. She's the amount of rejection that these detransitioners face is so shocking and is so disgusting.
And it's so clear that she was trying so hard to get that affirmation. I mean, she has a valid tattoo on her neck. So, and this is a girl who clearly needed the you know, the support, the affirmation, the affection that she got from the whole trans ideology. So for her to actually come out and reject it is incredibly brave, especially with all the vitriol that comes after anybody who publicly announces a detransition.
Yeah, because they don't just say you know, F off, you know, they actually say you were never trans. And I think that that's so awful because these girls are hurting in a big way. And every time, I know, I really want to say a clear message to anybody who ever gets made to feel bad or gets made to get shamed or gets told you're a bigot. These are the girls that we're talking about when we talk about the dangers of gender ideology. Is these girls. We're not talking about, you know, strong girls that have a voice. We're talking about really vulnerable girls with eating disorders, a lot of sexual abuse, and the amount of internalized homophobia with these girls is very high as well, or even just homophobia they experienced as teenagers. So they would come out as lesbian. You know the stories. They would come out as lesbian to their families, and then their fathers would be like, well, do you have to be, you know? And so then these girls would think, well, you know, I have another way. I'll just be a straight male.
Right.
I mean, it's not as clear as I know. It's a lot more complicated, but essentially it is.
Well, and that reminds me of someone who has come out trying to be a very strong activist in this movement, who went through the transition, and she specifically says she did it because her girlfriend's family was homophobic. And now she's coming out and saying she's a true trans person and trying to advocate for these kids. But in my view, there's no way that someone like that can advocate, because she's still internalizing all that homophobia that caused her to be willing to damage her body in significant ways just in order to avoid the homophobia of her in-laws. And so we really have to question people who are standing up for our children and what their motives are, because if they're people who are still embracing that kind of homophobic approach, then that's going to be damaging to these kids.
Yeah, and that really seems to be quite a common theme with the people that come out as gender critical. You know, when they're saying that they're true trans. I see this as I see this very clearly as paralleled in my own experience of getting help for eating disorders. You know, you would have a hierarchy of sick people, hierarchy of sick crazy girls, and we would pick on each other and bully each other. So if a girl was getting better, we would say to her, you're not truly sick. I'm truly sick, and you're making fun of the way that I'm sick, but I'm not going to get better because I'm really sick, but you need to get better. Just crazy. And it's not being honest, because the fact is that you just need to say, you know, I understand how it's hard to turn back from that point, because, you know, when you've gone, I mean, I think I know who you're talking about, you know, massive damage, and to say that that was all for nothing, or to say that it was all to fit in with homophobic in-laws that you frankly should have told to fuck themselves.
Yeah. But in a way, if she were to turn around, that would be so much more powerful and
Yeah.
could have such a bigger impact on these kids who, you know, who believe that they should do these horribly damaging things to their bodies in order to fit in better.
Yeah, man, I do agree with you, and I think that I find it very troubling when I see, you know, these types of messages from, you know, older people who I think they know the truth, right? And I don't know why they're in it still. Is it for money? Is it for, maybe it's just for affirmation because they made a mistake and they can't turn around?
Yeah.
But it's just this, it's almost just like it's like the inmates are running the asylum if we
Yeah.
say that this is the advocate for child safety.
Yeah.
It's just
And
really
the other thing that I want to bring up that sort of goes back to the conversion therapy thing is that so many of these girls and boys were sexually assaulted. And
yeah.
what they need is they need appropriate therapy. And instead, they're being told that hatred that they've internalized, that shame, that disgust that they have for themselves as a result of that sexual assault, they're internalizing all that and damaging their bodies instead of getting help to understand the abuse that happened to them wasn't their fault, and they're not inherently flawed, and they're not damaged, and they're not disgusting. And that shame that they have, they need to put that right back on the perpetrator. But instead, we now have a society that affirms this self-hatred. And to me, that is one of the saddest things, that these are kids that need help. And instead, we are pushing them to really internalize that self-hatred in a way, and the doctors are enabling self-harm.
100%. I mean, it's the fact that you and I today can walk in and just, you know, with my history, with my mental history, I think that, you know, any psychiatrist should really think twice about giving me testosterone, because I have a, you know, a 10-year history, 15-year history of an eating disorder. And I think that would definitely require a big microscope on that. But the fact is, it's not the case. I can walk in today and get it, and I shouldn't be able to. And I think that many of these girls are walking in with a laundry list of problems. The autism, we already know about it. You know, the self-harm, the abuse. They're walking in and they're getting these treatments, and they're never solving the root of the problem. It's just, it makes me so unbelievably angry. And there's nothing that makes me, I think, my blood boil more than is the picture of a girl in a binder, or a picture of a girl having a double mastectomy, because I feel that in itself, that act of just binding the breasts, it's like saying it's
like corseting. It's like, you know, it restricts breathing. It restricts, I mean, it blood flow and oxygen and things that are really important. And I can't, I mean, we got rid of foot binding, but now we're going to breast binding, which just is
Yeah.
atrocious. I mean,
Well, corseting did make sense at some point because it was a fashion item, and therefore, you know what I'm saying? Like it made that it's insane, but it made sense. The binding is so clearly somebody taking out some really deep hate, deep rooted hate out on themselves, and we're just all kind of like, they're just they were born in the wrong body. It's like it's so crazy. No, this girl needs help. This girl really, really needs help. They all very much need help, and they're not getting it. None of them are getting it. And this kind of leads us very gingerly on to the informed consent. So the informed consent for Planned Parenthood is just a crock of
person who makes sperm. We don't have men and female anymore. This is a Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, so you've obviously heard you've obviously heard that Planned Parenthood is now saying that women get pregnant from people who make sperm, or individuals.
People with eggs get pregnant from people who make sperm, because we have to be very careful here. It's just ridiculous.
I also think it's very people talk about inclusionary language. Now, I really want to turn that on its head and say it's exclusionary language, because if you're a woman who maybe is on the autism spectrum, or if you're a woman that has an IQ of 80, okay, you can still get pregnant, and you still need to be told exactly how that happens. It's very exclusionary language. I mean, I don't know about
It also, there's this idea that I've heard somebody referred to women as uterus havers, and I'm like, well, what about people who, women whose uteruses have been removed? Does that mean they're no longer women? Or, it's the language is so clumsy and awkward and difficult, and what it really does is it sort of marginalizes women and men. I mean, it's sort of erasing the concept of men and women, which are important concepts.
Very important concepts, and inescapable concepts, to be honest.
When you mention disabled people, I'm thinking if you have someone who is got some developmental delays, and they could be housed in a shelter or in a locker room or somehow with male-bodied people, and they may not even understand that they could potentially be raped or get pregnant from that person, because they're being told that this is actually a man or a woman. I mean, it sets it up that the most vulnerable people in society are becoming more vulnerable as a result of this kind of language.
Yeah, and I think that also, I mean, when the women's movement came out against this, in the very beginning, they said, if we don't have the language to describe what's happening to us, then we can't communicate it. We can't say, if we can't say, 50 of us are raped every week, or 2 of us are killed every week by our domestic partners. If we can't say these words, if we can't communicate it, how can we address it and how can we fix it? And it goes into every facet of society. So you said about the girl who might be disabled and might not know if she's even being raped. But what if that person is claiming to be female, does rape her, and then that gets recorded as a female crime?
Right.
We're gonna women only it's gonna go crazy. I mean,
the whole the way we're collecting data is going to just skew everything, because they're misrepresenting truth when they collect data like that. And then you have that perpetrator who then can go into a women-only prison and have access to more vulnerable women.
It's beyond crazy. I mean, it really is. It's just absolutely beyond crazy. And the thing is because when I say Caitlyn Jenner started it all, I really mean, like, with this idea that they started it all. Caitlyn Jenner was the first person to say, I am a woman. If I go to jail, I should go to jail as a woman. So this is all very, and we all said, okay, she's a woman in some strange kind of way, but you're not a woman because you're male. And it's all getting very confusing. So it takes away our ability to even communicate what's going on.
Because if you have to say a man who believes he thinks that he's a woman every time,
right.
That's just so clunky. But if you say trans woman, then you're playing into the language that they want us to have.
Exactly. And also, if I'm in the bathroom and I'm using female language, if I'm using the she pronouns, or not a gynophile, and he's there, and I need to have him removed because he's a male, and I say, you need to get her out, that doesn't make any sense. The policeman is going to say, I need to get her out, but she belongs here, she's a woman. So it's just, you're in such a mess with all of this, and it just means like I think that I would, if they stopped all of the experimentation on children and all of the aggressive trying to get into our spaces, I think I would be considered to make some changes to the language in some situations in some way. But right now, because of what's going on, I'm not going to concede an inch. I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to use any of these pronoun nonsense. You know, and I just find that, because this is where you get. You can identify into a women's prison and have someone champion you. You know, Scott
Yeah, they're the
Wiener.
victim now. We have young women who have become men's rights activists without even knowing it.
Right. And, you know, Scott Wiener, who is like the supposedly was supposed to come to California and champion gay rights. Well, what does he do? He suddenly comes along and he's forcing men into women's prison. And it's against the Constitution, because you're not even allowed to have cruel and unusual punishment. But women, I don't want to say, but women will die from that. They will get hurt. They will of course be raped. It just makes no sense. And then again with Planned Parenthood, if we look at this is so crazy what they're saying here, what they're claiming. They're saying, first of all, they're saying that there are benefits. There's no benefits for a woman to take testosterone. Even I think in cases of early menopause and whatever, you really don't want a woman to be taking testosterone because it's quite dangerous. So they go ahead and they just dish this out to you. They don't care if you're overweight. If you're overweight, you've got a real risk there of having an enlarged heart. There have been cases of people who have had heart attacks from testosterone. It does happen.
Strokes.
Strokes.
And the other thing that strikes me is that based on the conversations that I've had, they don't titrate the dosage for weight or for anything else, or to test how much you have already. So it's sort of this one size fits all treatment. Here you go. And they have no idea how it's going to even affect each individual woman. And so there's no way they can even talk about the risks, because they don't really know what the risks are.
No, this is all experimental, completely experimental. And the way that I actually got into speaking to the Planned Parenthood workers was through an organization, which I think that the gender critical movement, or the movement that wants to save some of these kids, could really learn a lot from other movements. I broke into the Planned Parenthood old employee, by contacting a pro-life organization. I wrote to them. I said, listen, I'm not really on your kind of side on this, but I really think that we need to talk about the issue of the children and whatever, because what they do is they pay people to stop working in abortion clinics. So I said, do you know somebody who recently have you gotten out from Planned Parenthood? Because I really want to ask them a couple of questions about this. And they confirmed everything, absolutely everything. They have no idea. They have no idea about what this does. And the fact that of this informed consent nonsense that they're saying, they're also they also say, very funny, the benefit is getting a mustache and beard. I really don't know why that's a benefit. Why has Planned Parenthood decided that that's a benefit? They also do not say how much bigger the clitoris will get. It gets there's a lot of growth there, and they don't say your clitoris gets bigger. They call it bottom growth. And I think we need to stop with these euphemisms. We need to stop referring to it as top surgery and bottom growth and, getting on T and all of this. We need to get rid of it. We need to talk, say what's really happening.
Well, and also with benefits, if they're benefits, then they should be benefits across the board. And so that should be a benefit for anybody who takes it. And the fact is that this is not a benefit for anybody who takes it. I mean,
Well, there is one benefit that kind of upsets me a little bit, because the moment I read this, you will have noticed less fat on your buttocks,
Uh,
hips, and the more.
See, and I've heard that there are some women who have eating disorders who are specifically, like you said, trying to access testosterone because they know
I
that
know.
it will redistribute their muscle or their fat tissues. Yeah,
I mean, I'm just thinking about it now. Would I have done it at 14? 100%.
yeah.
100%. I would not. I
Yeah,
would
I
have
wouldn't
made,
have even, I mean, I would have started as young as they would have let me. I mean,
yeah. And
and that's the thing is kids often don't know what's good for them. And that's why they have parents, and that's why we have society protecting them, because kids do dumb things.
right. And the thing is that all of this can happen. All of this can happen to you whilst you are in the throes of a psychiatric breakdown, whilst you are in the throes of maybe you were raped the night before and you'll stroll on into Planned Parenthood and think that this might fix your problem. They're not doing any screening, any psychological screening, and neither are the surgeons.
Yeah.
And they're, I mean, they are of course the worst because you, they don't even want to admit that ROGD exists. They
Right.
don't even want to say that it exists, because if it does, then they say it's transphobic. Now, that really upsets me. That's a female mental health crisis, and you're trying to gaslight me and say to me that it's wrong that we're speaking about it. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's just exactly like Joey said.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same as anorexia.
Yeah.
It's behavior in teenage girls, and they're strolling into Planned Parenthood, and they're getting this. And I think that again we go into the more of these horrible. And when I say horrible, I'm not judging anybody who's gone for this, because I think I would have too. But they say that atrophy is reversible. From what I've heard, it's not reversible at
No.
all. So they say it's reversible, so that's just lying.
Well, they don't
Um,
know. And part of this has to do with the age and maturity at which someone starts taking it, because somebody who's 18, two different 18-year-old girls can look very different. One could have totally gone through puberty, and one of them can still be right in the middle of those changes. So
yeah,
we don't know any of this. And for them to actually have a chart where they have expected onset, maximum benefits, reversibility is just absurd. I mean, because we don't know what these are going to do.
no idea. And there's no data that periods return.
Right.
So cynical the name of Planned Parenthood, because these women might not be able to have kids.
Right. Right. And the other thing is that it puts them on a path where they're more likely to have their breasts amputated and more likely to have their ovaries removed. And I actually saw some kind of a presentation that they a lot of times women have hysterectomies kind of prophylactically, because
Yeah,
the pain
yeah.
from the atrophy can be so significant that doctors just encourage them to go ahead and have their uteruses removed pretty early on after taking testosterone.
I spoke to two F2Ms, detransitioners, that told me that they had the mastectomy because of the pain of the binder, and it was a relief in some way. So I'm just, I mean, I'm just so horrified at this. It's a horror show, really. It really is a horror show of this. We're taking people who are perhaps damaged in some way, they've been abused in some way, they have some kind of problem, or you're taking just gay people and hurting them and putting them and trying to perform surgeries on them. It's so scandalous.